Welcome to today's conversation on amplifying impact through collaboration and community. I'm Sharlene Brown, Senior Fellow at Croatan Institute and Director of our Racial Equity, Economics, Finance, and Sustainability Program. A few housekeeping items before we dive in. First, this session is being recorded. If you're joining us by Zoom, please use the Q&A box for all questions. And if you're joining us live on YouTube, please write your questions in the comment box. A quick disclaimer, please note today's conversation is for educational purposes. As it has been for many teams and organizations, 2020 and 2021 have been deeply reflective. Our team commenced the strategic planning process in the fall of 2020 and concluded it in June of this year. Through this process, we've refined our mission and vision statements and identified our key values. Notably, we've refreshed our mission to reflect the action-oriented nature of our work. While we are an independent research institute, our team combines intense field experiences overseas and in the United States. Using these experiences, we're working to amplify our efforts to shift finance, to address the climate challenge and better serve various communities that have been disenfranchised. Farmers, communities of color, women, and those identifying as LGBTQIA+, to name a few. In all of our efforts, we work at the nexus of finance, social equity, and ecological resilience. This slide highlights the 8 cross-cutting themes of our organization and of our team. We recognize that the complexity of today's problem requires solutions offered by stakeholders with different vantage points. And while doing the work that we do, we hold ourselves to the highest standards to be both rigorous and independent in sharing our observations and lessons learned. Being part of the community of like-minded partners creates shared vision. And we know collaboration increases the likelihood of creating effective solutions from the outset. We are thankful to the more than 125 partners we've had since our public launch on Earth Day in 2014. And today, I am pleased to have the opportunity to partner with my colleague and good friend, Josh Humphreys, who is Senior Fellow, President, and co-founder of Croatan Institute, to host this conversation. Josh, I'll hand you the floor to properly introduce our collaborators for good, Vicki Lee Parker-High of the North Carolina Business Council, and David Sand of Community Capital Management.
Thanks, Sharlene. Thanks everybody for joining us today for our latest Croatan Conversation, a series that we launched last year. In part because of COVID and our inability to gather in person, but I'm really delighted to have with us today 2 of the Institute's most longstanding supporters and collaborators, and indeed 2 of our founding Croatan Forum Advisory Committee members as well, who've been very active in a wide range of initiatives at the Institute. I'm going to let David and Vicki say a bit more about their professional roles, but I'm going to take the liberty just to say a few words about how we've interacted with them at the Institute for long. In many ways, it goes back to the founding. I think David Sand was one of the first people I talked to when we were co-founding the Institute out of TELUS in Boston. Went to him pretty early. And whispered in his ear this idea that the team at TELUS might be taking our work in a different direction. And he eagerly joined our founding board of advisors and has been a really longstanding partner and supporter, both personally and through the firm where he works, Community Capital Management. So David has been involved not only in our forum advisory committee, our founding board of advisors. CCM has also been very active in our Clean Portfolio project, providing total portfolio approaches to integrated solutions to climate change. And he's also been a very generous seed funder as a member of our Founders Circle, which we brought to a close earlier this year, he and his wife Jocelyn. And David also is a really important advisor and partner to one of our major current initiatives around place-based finance for regenerative agriculture, specifically around a new district concept known as Rhodes that we're developing, regenerative organic agricultural districts. So CCM is a partner in that initiative, and David is one of our investor advisory committee members. So really delighted to have David here today to talk a little bit about how we all collaborate and how we can generate more social and environmental impact by doing so. Vicki Lee Parker-High is also one of our really longstanding friends and partners. She's also a neighbor of mine here in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. Head of the ASBC, the American Sustainable Business Council's North Carolina division. And again, as I've mentioned, Vicki's been involved with our forum, with our board of advisors, and NCBC has been a really critical partner in one of our, earliest major collaborative initiatives that had substantial impact around an investor statement against House Bill 2 back in 2016. And indeed, CCM signed on to that. I believe David's name was on that letter as well. So we've just been a longstanding ally with ASBC and North Carolina Business Council. And Vicki also is one of our founding steering committee members of our Racial Equity, Economics, Finance, and Sustainability Initiative that Sharlene directs. So there are a lot of very distinctive ways in which these two longstanding partners have collaborated with us. So it's a real delight to have them in this conversation with Sharlene and me. And it should be said that Sharlene, as many of you know, was also one of our earliest founders, a member of our founding board of advisors before she actually joined the Institute several years ago to take charge of reefs, which she helped us to brainstorm with my late colleague Fern Jones, as well as with Henry McCoy, who's also one of our members of the Reef Steering Committee. So collaboration is just intrinsic to what we do. So I'm really pleased to have this conversation, and I'll turn it over now to David to say a few more words about what he actually does in Boston.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Sharlene. Greetings, everybody. I don't have a whole lot to add to your words. I work at Community Capital Management. We are an impact money management firm, independent, based in Florida. I work in Boston. Most of our work is in high credit quality fixed income. Everything we do has a impact theme associated with it, many of which touch upon themes that you all have been working on since day one, basically sustainable agriculture you mentioned, but also the broader issues of how the capital markets can be made to work better for underserved people and communities and businesses. And so our connection, which you listed very thoroughly, really is a reflection of how your work has touched upon what we think of as our work. We consider ourselves very focused. We're only in certain asset classes. We only look for certain credit quality. We only look for investment opportunities that have embedded impact as defined by us and by our clients. And over the years, much of your content, output, thought leadership has revolved around many of those same issues. And hopefully we'll get into that on this call.
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks for being here. Vicki, how about your day-to-day down the road?
Sure. So again, I'm Vicki Lee Parker-High, and thank you, Josh, for this opportunity to join you all today on this important conversation about collaboration. And really, the North Carolina Business Council and that partnership with the American Sustainable Business Council was born out of that effort you mentioned earlier around the House Bill 2. Was formed by socially responsible business owners who felt that because of that experience, that there needed to be an organization of business owners and leaders who would continue to add a voice and advocate for policies that benefited businesses, looking at social policies and that intersection of social issues in business and the economy. So really that effort back then was the spark to who we are today. So we, our businesses, all of our members take a pledge to be what we call our triple bottom line businesses. And those are businesses committed to people, planet, and profit. So these are businesses who understand and appreciate the value that they make in their communities, they make to their stakeholders, as well as the economy as a whole. So from the beginning, our values align. A lot about we consider, farmers, business owners, and a lot of the things that you guys value, we value as well. So we saw our working and continue to work with you all as a perfect fit to achieve our respective missions.
So great. I am going to hop back in. So as you reflect on the work that you have been engaged in with the Institute, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'll go first.
Vicki.
I'll go ahead. And I'm proud of all the work we've done over the probably 5 years. But again, I think, Josh, you mentioned that effort that you all brought together around HB2. I think that really stands out in my mind. It was, if my understanding, the first time where you had investors bring together over $2.1 trillion of asset investment to a cause that had never been done. You were able to bring together, I believe it's Trillium Asset Management, the Croatan Institute, the New York City Comptroller, as well as a number of place-based investors here in North Carolina to address the issue that was going unaddressed from the business community. And for those who are listening and not familiar with that bill, just briefly, it was basically a bill that didn't allow the LGBTQ community, sorry about that, to select the bathroom of their gender identity. And as a result, it really hurt our small businesses throughout the North Carolina. We lost at some estimates over $40 million of investments that were moved out of the state. I'm sure it was much more than that. But in addition, a lot of the smaller and mid-sized businesses were really hurt by some of the other cancellations that we experienced. So it was that collaborative work of you guys seeing that something had to be done, that there had to be a real voice brought to this issue. And you all were able to pull together those investors who had, again, missions and like mind, and who cared about these types of issues, bring them together, get them to sign on a letter to present to our state leaders. And it was effective. That bill was basically reset, I guess is the best word. And we were able to kind of go forward and kind of restate our investors for the state. So it was a real example and telling moment of how collaboration really can have a real impact when it's done right and when we all come together for a shared purpose.
Great. And David, from your perspective?
Yeah, so for me, in terms of what am I most proud of, it's kind of personal. It's really the issue and agenda selection. I find sometimes I've been in the alternative capital markets or socially responsible investing markets or impact ESG markets for many, many years. And I've always kind of been guided by an instinctive feel for what issues are important to me, to my colleagues and clients, and also always hoping that there are future clients out there that will have interests that maybe they haven't been captivated particularly by stuff that's been going on before, but something new has evolved. Sometimes that feels random, but when I look at the work that Josh and Sharlene and their colleagues have done, they're finding, not always, but most of the time, the same progression in terms of what are the frontiers, what is the next frontier for trying to bring advocacy to the capital markets in a way that's focused on social change, but also on making real capital reallocation decisions. And whether, going back to just showcasing being fossil fuel free, which of course is very trendy now, but not so much years and years ago when Josh was working on it. And some of the issues we've already talked about today, some of the sustainable agricultural work, and also just really building the intellectual support for using the capital markets as a tool for good. That's something I've tried to be part of for a long time, and I'm very proud of the role that Croatan has played in that.
And maybe before I hand the floor back to Josh, could you comment on sort of the power of replication and impact? Because I think even in the case of the HB2, we did see an effort to replicate that in another state. And certainly I think with any of the work that we've done around total portfolio activation, it's interesting when I Google that term now, it comes up, many organizations are using it. They're not giving us credit for it, but they're using that term. So I'd just love for you to comment on that.
Yeah, you know, there's a big business now in royalties for intellectual property, so maybe we missed the boat there. But I mean, I think Josh and you all, use the term institute very intentionally in the creation. And I remember, Josh, you referred to it. You were still up here in Massachusetts before you had the good sense to move back to North Carolina. Although it is warm here today, it's chilly. It's fall. And the work that you had done, did really lay the groundwork for what you're doing now. And in truth, the field of impact investing, I mean, a lot of us have been in it for a long time, or whatever you want to call this from the capital markets point of view. So not so much the HB2 part, which is the pure advocacy, but some of the other work connected to that, which is both advocacy and how you weave that advocacy into investment decisions, manager selection decisions, asset allocation decisions. That requires thought leadership. I mean, it's all well and good that, Vicki, I think you mentioned Trillium. I used to work there, so good friends, those folks, and our firm and others. We are practitioners. And in order to do the practice that we want to do and to grow our practice and grow the field, it requires more, I keep using the same word, but intellectual support. We're trying to carve, and you are trying to carve new pathways for how to think about money in the context of some of the problems that we face in our society and in our culture. And also, that's the half empty part, but then also on the half full part, on maybe some of the solutions where the tools exist, and it's just a question of getting recognition for those tools and a little bit of leadership in trying to implement on those tools.
I will echo that sentiment exactly. I mean, Croatan Institute is really shaping that dialogue and helping to move it through that financial world that is new to them, but now it has starting to take root. I'm looking at your logo here and I'm thinking of it as just that. You guys have laid the groundwork and laid the seeds, and now we're starting to see the fruits of that. In the financial market, no, there was no real thought, I think, about impact and the type of social impact that we are advocating initially. But you do, and I'm starting to hear it much more. Even in the 5 years that I've been in this role, I hear them repeating the language that I heard you talk about, Josh, when I first met you. I'm hearing that more. And I believe, I feel like we're at the front lines of this emerging new way of investing, new way of looking at investing and seeing the real impact that investing can have on our local communities, not just people's pockets, but looking at the broad impact that it can make. And I think people are starting to grasp that concept and really start to have those dialogues about how that can be made possible.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, David.
Yeah, in a way, David is already challenging kind of my next round of questions, so that'll allow me to get a little deeper with it. I mean, Sharlene mentioned replication. I think one thing that was intriguing about the investor statement against HB2 back in 2016 is that it was it was a kind of rapid response that emerged very organically. But in hindsight, it was, it was literally an early conversation between me and Matt Paskey, the CEO of Trillium Asset Management, who himself is a member of the LGBT community and took it really quite personally. At the time, Trillium had an office in Durham, North Carolina. So there are a lot of different potential ways in which, we had deep alignment around that. And then having conversations with members of NCBC made it very clear that the business community, the small business community, because corporates actually had already made some statements, but investors really had not. Some of the startups here in the Research Triangle had also made some statements, but to mobilize small businesses at the level that Vicki often represents, as well as to bring the investor voice to bear, was a new amalgam. And in hindsight, it was an initiative that emerged in politics in a way that was timely, because in parallel to that, we actually were working on the first ever application of the total portfolio activation framework to LGBTQ equality, which had never really been done. And fast forward to today, Sharlene and our team on the Reef side has just released the first total portfolio activation application to racial equity investing. And heretofore, these thematic approaches to impact investing have really just been a series of lists. They've been a kind of deal by deal, fund by fund, inventory, listicles, whatever you want to call it. You can go out there on the websites and you can find things, but rarely are they put together in a framework that we describe as total portfolio activation, because it gets at David's initial point that not every investor has the appetite to be a bond investor in the way that CCM has pioneered it. Not every investor has the appetite to invest in a small business using, say, private loans in the way that many of Vicki's members really need in terms of capital, or being private equity, investees. And so you need a holistic framework to think about it. And what was interesting about HB2's investor statement is that it actually brought together not a network of shareholders, because it wasn't about shareholding. It was about the thematic issue. And what we had was, I think, one of the first statements in which you had not only the typical kinds of large asset owners and asset managers, but you also had place-based banks. You had private equity angel networks. You had philanthropic foundations who are really rooted in place, in addition to international and global investors. It allowed us to respond rapidly when we got feedback that, folks in North Carolina shouldn't be lectured by New York hedge funds. There were no New York hedge funds on the list. You're being lectured by your own neighbors who are concerned about the fragility of the startup community right here. And as Sharlene suggested, that then provided a template and a blueprint for what then became an order of magnitude larger investor coalition that really completely scuttled a parallel initiative within Texas, Senate Bill 6, didn't allow it even to get off the ground. So I think that there's something to be said for this way in which the research frameworks, that intellectual thought leadership, if you will, that Dave is describing, inform the strategic imperatives that we're trying to do. It's not that we're throwing spaghetti at the wall. So I wondered if you two could reflect on that, potentially in the context of the kinds of engagements you've been doing. I don't know, David, if you might want to say a word about, for example, the Rhodes initiative that you're involved with now as kind of a live wire experiment in place. And maybe Vicki, you might say a word or two about Reefs along similar lines. This way in which collaboration that we foster with our allies and partners is often deeply rooted in research, which is a little unusual and undervalued at times.
Sure. The Rhodes Experience for me, and you have to say, it's an acronym, you have to say it one more time for everyone's benefit, including mine from time to time.
Yeah, the regenerative organic agricultural districts, a kind of experiment that we've been working on over the last year and a half.
Almost the S. I feel like the D, but then you add the S. But that project, I'm happy that we're contributing. I feel like we should be paying tuition to it in terms of exactly what you said, Josh. The group that's brought together. I mean, we talk a good game. We have clients that ask us to pursue sustainable agriculture as an impact theme, and we're always looking for investments that will fit in their portfolios and match up against that theme. I'm not going to lie, we don't talk to farmers very often in that work. We talk to investment bankers, we talk to underwriters. We're getting a little infrastructure here. I apologize for the noise. But being a part of the group that has come together for that multi-year grant, we're talking to people in the agricultural business, in the farming business, who are looking for things that can further their work eventually, and I'm not sure, how long a road they have to go, but eventually make contact with the capital markets. And of course, if you look back at the work that so many of us have been trying to do for so long, it's about reestablishing connections that used to exist in our world, in our culture, in our economies. And a lot of those connections, as we entered the so-called modern era, got broken. Things rolled up, staying with agriculture. You had agribusiness, you had, global financing for mega firms. Everybody knows the environmental consequences around that. But the other consequence that maybe doesn't get quite as much attention is there was a disconnect between people working on the land, people benefiting from their labors, and people investing in their labors. And I don't think it's too ambitious to say that the work of Rhodes over time can be part of an effort that's going on in many different arenas to reestablish and rebuild some of those connections. Everybody wants to be local. That's appropriately very top of mind, very trendy right now. But when you ask people sincerely, what are your tools? What are your options for doing that? They're few and far between, and being part of an effort that is hopefully will lead to some successful new solutions and new ways to approach some of these issues is very exciting for us and for me personally.
So I'm actually going to do the same. I'm going to try to remember Reef's stand, I believe it's racial equity,
Economics, finance, and sustainability. So the S does mean something.
So one of the things that really got me excited about that initially, and when before COVID, we were able to come together, is that you all were able to bring some of your top Black advocates into the room with this capital market. It was able to merge and bring together these groups that really, as far as I could tell, would have had no other opportunity to interact in that way and have such an engaging conversation, and to have that dialogue, to hear the ideas and hear the possibilities and opportunities that the Black community had, and then to hear the capital market side how they could intersect and work together. And it was just exciting to see that come together. This is a real complex issue, honestly. I mean, when you're talking about investing and you're talking about, asset management, and you're talking, for a lot of folks, these terms are somewhat vague. At least they were for myself. However, Croatan has done such an excellent job in, number one, helping us understand and helping different components of this ecosystem understand the role that they play and how they interact in this whole financial scheme, and bringing them all to the table and to one room where we can have real dialogue. And for those of you who are on the call who weren't able to attend some of those earlier meetings, I'm sure you'll hear about them. You have to be there to hear those real discussions, those real-time discussions. And, I think it has allowed us to bring those ideas together and to leverage all of our missions. Again, North Carolina Business Council, we have a very distinct mission to, build an equitable economy. We firmly believe that, we thrive when all people and entrepreneurs are able to get access to everything they need to grow, to just simply level the playing field. partnering with the Institute has allowed us to, amplify that voice even more than what we could have done on our own. We've allowed us to get in front of, a David and some others who are in that position to hear and to, create those ideas that allow us to actually make this real. Because again, those ideas are abstract until we get in the room and talk about them. Otherwise, it's like, what does that mean? What does impact investing really mean? But when we get in the room and you're talking to leaders in different parts of the state, and then those who have, that are in that position to do that investing, then the answers come. And that's what I have seen happen over the past few years.
Yeah, and I think, the way that you're describing it, Vicki, is kind of a framing that we realized by going through the strategic planning process. It sort of helped us to formalize and clarify these different pathways that we often work on, and we often do it simultaneously. And I think it's our colleague David Lazax who might deserve credit for this sort of framing that you see within the strategic plan of serving as sort of the magic in the middle, which needs to be trademarked too, probably. I don't know if David deserves full credit. We intermingle our ideas so often, sometimes it's hard to know who comes up with all these clever things. But I do think that it came out of a recognition that for someone like Vicki Lee Parker-High to say that finance seems mystifying is I think telling, because I mean, Vicki, you worked at a CDFI loan fund, one of the the pioneering Black-led CDFI loan funds. So for you, who's had experience in the capital markets in the private debt side, to say that finance is still opaque highlights how for grassroots frontline communities and activist groups and movement organizations with whom we work regularly as well, among those more than 125 types of organizations, it's an even greater challenge for helping, if you're a small business or a farmer, that sort of missing middle of American life and indeed of our globalized world, because we obviously spend a lot of time in the US, but as Sharlene mentioned, we do work abroad, and our team's footprint extends abroad, whether in the microfinance space or in investor engagement or, in certain countries where we're working thematically on these things. There is a kind of hollowing out of the middle, which I think gets to what you're describing, David, of kind of reconnecting or reclaiming some kind of lost world in which finance itself, rightly so, has been demonized, because I think it's lost the sense of purpose that undergirds actually the intellectual ferment of total portfolio activation. And this is a broader, bigger conversation with a lot of longstanding friends, many of whom spend time in Boston for some reason, folks like David Wood and Steve Leidenberg and folks that we've worked with for a long time, who have really pressed us to think about what I and many others, not many actually, a few of us called the social function of asset classes, that finance has sort of intrinsic purposes. I'm known to say it repeatedly. We call them bonds, which David trades regularly because they connect us. We call it equity because it's about not only a return on that equity, but that it's fundamental to ownership, stewardship, and fairness. These concepts, we kind of forget about the nature of securities, right? Securities are things that are supposed to deliver a certain security to us. We've lost sort of that intrinsic etymological purpose of finance. And I think many of our stakeholders are trying to figure out either how to beat up finance because it's lost its way, or to reclaim that social purpose. So we're really excited to deepen our relationships with place-based partners like Vicki and capital markets players like David, bring them into conversation and accelerate these kinds of initiatives where folks need access to better forms of capital, and capital market influencers need to redirect their capital into things that have meaningful impact. So I'll throw it back to you, Sharlene, I think for the last round here.
Sure. So thank you for summarizing that we're in the business of innovations. That's going to be a simple statement. We're in the business of innovations, and we are definitely doing that connection and making the magic work in the middle. With innovations in mind, as you think about us collectively moving forward, what are some of the themes that are emerging as priorities? And And if you could make recommendations to us about where to sort of place stakes, what would you like us to be working on?
I'll jump in. I'll let David bring up the rear end. I've said this privately and I'll say it publicly. I honestly feel you're on the right track. I honestly believe that. I honestly think that we are just starting to scratch the surface on this impact and place-based investment. And there's a lot more to do. So we're headed in the right direction, but we're just getting started. Again, there is a lot of opportunity to have a lot of influence for good. Again, I go back to the HB2 bill and that bringing those folks together and that model. Again, it's a model that we replicate here at NCBC, but I see that there's a lot of power in that voice and in these collaboration that we're just starting to tap into. We're starting to see that there are people, as they hear more about this work and they hear about this opportunity to be more impactful, to be more thoughtful, to make a difference in communities and make a difference on a lower level, not just the numbers on Wall Street, but where they can really have impact. I've seen now where I've seen investors look and want more, to learn more about how to make that a reality. And I think there's still a lot of questions to ask and be answered, but I believe we're heading there. And I think if we stay on tune there, of course, the research that you do is my guiding light. And I think it's the guiding light for a lot of folks, because then we can see the evidence as we go along. So, as you guys are, the magic in the middle, but you're also documenting the journey, tracking the journey so that we can see how we can learn as we go and, keep pushing this needle forward, that, all investors start to think, as your vision states, how they can do well.
David, your input?
So I would echo Vicki that you're on the right track. And then I would add selfishly, if you're going somewhere new, even if it's adjacent to or kind of a organic growth from where you are, I want to know about it, because that's the kind of thing that I think is not that we would ever outsource our work to you, but if you think something is important for the work that you're doing and for the place and presence that you have, there's a really strong chance that we as a firm, we as individuals and our clients are going to want to hear more about that and explore it. Doesn't mean they can throw tens of millions of dollars at it right away. Some of this is about developing investment opportunities and developing channels, but that would be of great interest. And then we've talked about it a little bit, but I think the work around racial equity and how the capital markets can, or in some instances cannot, be a force for bringing greater economic and racial justice. We're very, very early days in those discussions, and I know there's quite rightly a lot of focus on increased selection of firms with diverse staff, with minority managers, or diverse constituents, but I think a lot of the work that you all have done and hopefully will continue to do is around getting to an understanding of the impact and implications for communities of investment decisions that are made. And I worked with Sharlene and your colleague, name I'm forgetting, it was long name, on trying to be helpful to looking at the various implications of certain type of investments that in some instances give people the benefit of the doubt. Clients aren't necessarily fully aware that a decision that they made or a manager that they hired or a product that they purchased could be reinforcing systemic racism in our society, and that maybe there was something else maybe that they could have opted for instead that would have met some of their same financial goals and objectives and fiduciary responsibilities that could have been reinforcing, that might be reinforcing an effort to right the wrongs of the past. And that is a field that there's a lot of work to be done for all of us there. And I think we've got a good head start in that area.
I want to add just real quickly, Josh. I know you had mentioned about how I mentioned it was mystified and working with a community development financial institution, the CDFI. It did feel that, you know, we were in one lane and then you had the other markets in another lane. And the mystery was how do the two connect? How do the two collaborate? How do we cross over? So we were very focused in doing what we were doing and serving the businesses in certain communities and working, you know, with the national, you know, with the government and the Treasury to have impact in these communities. But the mystery was like, how do we get the larger capital market to join in this effort with us? And that seemed to be a little bit elusive. And again, you guys have helped to kind of bridge that gap and connect us on different levels and connect investors on different parts of the pyramid, as you will.
Yeah, I think both of you have highlighted something. So Vicki, when you talk about being in your lane, I always like to think everyone's in their corner. You know what you experience. And I think, again, this is where the collaborations and the partnerships give us real power, because we're able to then gather those perspectives and learn from them. And I think that will also apply to our work on racial equity investing. I think in this paper that we've just released, we've actually had to define it because we saw that the definition was absent. And we realized that we're in the early days of this work and trying to keep it centered and focused as we move through this journey with the investing community, but also with the communities that are most impacted, whether they're Native or Black communities, et cetera. Yes. That there's a lot of work to be done and that we've got to continue to find ways to bring those communities together and to make sure that dialogue is happening. And yes, the journey will be long to create some of these capital market solutions to create investable opportunities, as the investors like to say. But I do think that there's immense power for us in educating the investors on this journey. And so again, David, to your participation in something like Rhodes, that is powerful. We need to have more folks be willing to walk the journey, recognizing that in the short term, the investment opportunity may not be there, but if they do the work today, that there will be long-term investable opportunity. So thank you guys for helping with that connection.
Charlene, it seems like we do have some Q&A coming into the box, and feel free others to join as we open it up now. And there's a question coming in from Stu Dahlheim. Hi, Stu. Stu's a longstanding friend and partner of the Institute, going back to our founding as well from Calvert. And Stu asks a perfectly fair point, which is, you know, how do we have impact in these areas that we're talking about that may be the bleeding edge and may require experimentation that in the CDFI space, for example, may require concessionary returns that may not be benchmarked adequately to the standards that a fiduciary would expect, let us say. How can you still make a positive impact and meet fiduciary responsibility? Are there good cases you would point to? And so I'll throw that to David first, since Stu's referencing you, David, but I will take the point of privilege to just say that I think that as I think David suggested as well, we are trying to have our fingers on the pulse of things early. And at the time, it may seem that if you go in deep into something early, that it may seem a potential violation of fiduciary norms, doesn't seem prudent. But if, let us say, those who have belatedly embraced the fossil fuel divestment campaign had done so before the wave of bankruptcies in coal companies, in midstream drillers, before Exxon wrote down billions of dollars, had considered the prospect of looking in, the front glass rather than just through the rear view mirror, I think their performance would be a lot better, including among, our blue chip endowments, like Harvard University, that was supposedly the model for a different kind of total portfolio, but not one that really recognized social and environmental purpose. So I don't see much misalignment between the demands of prudence and the opportunities to have, sustainable impacts of a positive sort in communities and on our ecosystems globally, that they really should go together, but they don't always, right? Because finance still has a very extractive component if it's not done well. But David, what do you think? And Vicki, you may have some reactions to that question too.
Well, you can throw it to me, but I would throw it to Sharlene, because this is a perfect plug for the report that you all came out with. I'm
Josh,
happy. I'm a little disappointed, but that that was a slam dunk right there, and make them look good, Sharlene.
I do think Josh's comments are very relevant, right? So hindsight is 2020. I think with the issue, particularly around racial equity and where we as a nation are going, if we don't invest in this moment in the communities that will at some point in this nation, because we already see the data emerging, likely become the majority minorities, right? We are failing to seize an economic opportunity. So for me, the business case is there. I was on a conversation this morning with a bunch of students from Columbia University, and the portfolio manager that was on the line was sort of making this link between inequality, extreme inequality as we see emerging in this nation, who demographically is impacted, and what are the implications for us for growth, right? So if only for the motive of being selfish and profit maximizing, that you think we should do this because the long-term opportunities will open up horizons for us, then you should do it. There is a moral thing that I would ask you to look back at your history and how you made your money. But at this point, I would say that we have a real opportunity. I think one of the things that differentiates this nation is actually our diversity, right? You look at the developed countries around the world, and they're not as diverse as we are. And there has been real estimates, $16 trillion is one that I saw, of lost economic opportunity because we have underinvested in communities of color. So the paper offers opportunities for folks to look at it. I think you're going to have to still do your homework, rightly so, as fiduciaries. But I think you would be irresponsible, frankly, to not realize that there is this emerging thing happening. And there's also a potential risk, right? No one thought the Arab Springs of the world could have happened in their backyards. I do not think we're exempt.
And I mean, the only thing I would add to is that, if you look at the history just of CDFIs, and there are thousands now across the country, but there are many of those that are very successful. So if you're looking for evidence and looking for results of what it can look like to invest in these communities, this is a profitable endeavor. So I think it has proven itself. I think we just simply need to recognize that, and the evidence is out there, I believe. And again, you can read the paper and learn more, but clearly, I think the evidence is there to show this is not a bad investment. It's not, like you said, it's not the knee-jerk return. It's not that, but in a way, it is, because if your true desire is to have communities that you want to live and play and work in, then this is the impact and the return is immediate. Because when you invest on this type of level and you invest with this mindset of having an impact, the return is immediate, and you have to learn to value that portion of it as well as looking at the dollars.
David, anything else, since you kind of punted that one over to Sharlene? Any further reflect? I mean, I think your perspective from the bond side might be interesting, because it's a different asset class that we haven't said very much about, to be honest.
I never thought that I would cite or quote Boris Johnson publicly, but I thought what he said at the start of the Glasgow summit was very interesting, and considering the source, worth listening to. He said, regardless of what your opinion about climate change, we are facing a period of social unrest that's attributable directly to the impact of climate change and warming climate. And you can make a case that we're already seeing that in the global South, as people are, communities, nations, cultures are being, hugely disrupted, and every reason to think that we're on a glide path now, where that's coming to the rest of the world. I don't even know if we still talk about the developed world, but the global North. Does that mean, to Sharlene's point, that we should invest in climate change mitigation because there's a lot of money to be made? Does that mean we should do it because it's the right thing to do, as it has been for many, many years? Or does that mean we should do it because we're really and truly screwed if we don't? Who cares? It means it should be done. And if some of that is investment opportunities that are ready for prime time, and many of them are, all to the good. And if some of those are innovation and a little bit experimental and need to be incubated somewhere, it certainly behooves those who control large amounts of capital to find a way to support that happening for their sake and for ours.
And I know, I think I'm going to kick it back to you, Sharlene, to close up, but I'll make one last point, since I serve on the board as a fiduciary for a small community-based group here in North Carolina. One of our partners, indeed, the Green Rural Redevelopment Organization. I serve on the Finance and Investment Committee as well. And we've been talking about banking relationships. And when I did a quick scan of cash management opportunities for this organization, it was interesting to see that some of our CDFI depository institutions actually were providing better returns for short-term liquidity management than the conventional bank that's down the road as part of a publicly traded conglomerate bank. And so that, if we spend a little bit of time in asking if we should put our money in Mechanics and Farmers Bank down the road or the self-help credit union, it's surprising what will come out of just a basic financial analysis at times. That again, the fiduciary duty demands that you spend more time with things that may be off the beaten track, but actually can deliver a compelling risk-free return in certain asset classes like cash. I know Sharlene's already entertained a really good conversation about cash allocations within the REIFs context. So I just think there are a lot of huge opportunities that are just sitting there, fruit on the ground that you just need to pick up. Other things, to Vicki's point, we have to plant seedlings. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sharlene.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us with 5 minutes to go, and certainly to thank Vicki and David and Josh for really engaging us in today's conversation and highlighting the power that partnerships and collaborations have. As we move into 2020, we are trying to amplify our work by broadening our base of partners that we engage with. And so please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at croatan.org/support. On that page, you'll find an opportunity to link to engage. And we are also kicking off our Canopy Community, which is our major donor effort that will run through 2024. And so if there's any interest in supporting us in this way, please also reach out to us. Thank you again for joining us for today's conversation, and look forward to engaging and partnering in the next year or so.
Thanks, Sharlene. Thanks for having us. And thanks again to Vicki and David for joining us, and all of you out there who've been able to join this conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.